Tonight's big stories. The Court of Appeals freezes the many assets of Kingdom of Jesus Christ leader Apollo Quiboloy, who, according to the police, is hiding within the church's vast compound in Davao City.
The country's oldest political party, Nacionalista, joins forces with President Marcos's much younger political bloc for the 2025 elections.
And some good news, economic growth accelerated by 6.3% in the second quarter, faster than expected thanks to a construction boom in both the public and private sector.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
A freeze order has been issued against the assets of fugitive pastor Apollo Quiboloy, who owns 10 bank accounts and several properties and vehicles.
Now, the order extends to his Kingdom of Jesus Christ Church and Suarasug Media Corporation, which owns SMNI.
Meanwhile, police say that Quiboloy is still inside the 30-hectare KOJC compound in Davao City. They are calling on the fugitive to peacefully surrender. Camille Samonte with a big story tonight.
The Court of Appeals has granted the petition of the Anti-Money Laundering Council to freeze the bank accounts and assets of Kingdom of Jesus Christ founder Apollo Quiboloy. The appellate court said Quiboloy's bank accounts were linked to illegal activities and predicate crimes including human trafficking, fraud, smuggling, and money laundering. The freeze order is effective immediately and will run for 20 days unless extended by the court. It covers 10 bank accounts, 7 real properties, 5 vehicles, and 1 aircraft owned by Quiboloy. The embattled church leader is facing a litany of charges, including for sexual and child abuse as well as human trafficking. There are multiple warrants of arrest out for him, but he remains in hiding. Also frozen by the Court of Appeals were assets named under the Kingdom of Jesus Christ and Suarasug Media Corporation, which owns SMNI. KOJC's assets include 47 bank accounts, 16 properties, and 16 vehicles. The appellate court said KOJC members were sent to the United States to solicit donations, and these were sent through those 47 bank accounts. The court also noted other suspicious deposits, withdrawals, and remittance transactions from these accounts. As for Suarasug Media Corporation, it has 17 bank accounts, 5 properties, and 26 vehicles under the freeze order. SMNI's legal counsel said they respect the decision of the court, but they will file either a motion to lift the freeze order or a temporary restraining order before the Supreme Court. Quiboloy's camp refused to comment until they receive a copy of the freeze order. As for the pastor's whereabouts, the Davao Regional Police said he is still somewhere inside the 30-hectare KOJC compound in Davao City.
Indicator nandiyan sa gate, literal, at sa tabi ng kalsada, di ba? So, babantayan mo nila yan ng ganyan klaseng pagdidepensa kung wala naman ang kanilang pinuno dyan. Indicators sa mga informants, ano? Simula nung magbigay rin tayo ng, kahit na wala pa yung mga rewards may mga nagbibigay ng information na talagang nandun siya.
Tory adds that they are still hoping Quiboloy will surrender to avoid a repeat of the June 10 incident when police clashed with Kingdom of Jesus Christ members while trying to serve the arrest warrant.
Definitely. Ayaw natin ng may masaktan dito, may lalo na't dumanak ng dugo. Hindi natin gawin yan. Maximum tolerance, sige lang. Hindi pa naman matatapos ang mundo, andyan lang naman siya. Kaysa may masaktan, baka pwede nating magawa ito sa mas maayos na paraan.
Police are now keeping a close watch on the possible exit points available to Quiboloy. Torres said they are ready in case Quiboloy tries to leave by air.
Meron naman tayong air unit Ang air unit naman natin, armed naman ang ating helicopter The worst comes to worst, they can try the might of the government if they want to do that.
Meanwhile, Senator Risa Hontiveros welcomed the freeze order on Quiboloy's assets. She thanked AMLAC for its effort and hopes the order would deter any planned escape from Quiboloy. Hontiveros also called on local authorities to work with foreign counterparts to ensure that Quiboloy will not be able to funnel money to offshore accounts now that his assets in the Philippines have been frozen. For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
Now, as expected, the administration's Partido Federal ng Pilipinas is shaping up to be the most dominant alliance for next year's midterm elections. The latest addition to the ruling ticket is the Nacionalista Party, which is the oldest political party in the Philippines that once fielded the president's late father as candidate. Maricel Halili reports.
2 months before the filing of the certificates of candidacy for the 2025 elections, President Bongbong Marcos's Partido Federal ng Pilipinas has joined forces with the Nacionalista Party of the Villars. Nacionalista is the oldest party in the Philippines and was also home to the president's father, Ferdinand Marcos. There to seal the deal today were PBBM himself and NPC chairman and former Senate President Manny Villar. And now that it's apparent that PFP is by far the largest political bloc in the country, President Marcos is confident of a sweep, but he has this reminder.
Make sure that the leadership that will come out, that will win after the election of the midterm election next year, are the leaders who understand that we must put our partisan, our personal differences aside, whatever they may be.
Partido Federal is yet to choose who will make up its senatorial slate next year. Before the alliance with the Villar family's NP, Marcos's ticket under the Bagong Pilipinas banner had already struck unity deals with 3 other political parties. These are the Lakas CMD of House Speaker Martin Romualdez, the Nationalist People's Coalition of former Senate President Tito Soto, and the National Unity Party of Ronaldo Puno.
Naniniwala tayo na magkakaiba't iba man ang ideolohiya at prinsipos na meron tayo at estratehiya kung paano tayo nagpapalakas, pero pag binuo mo ito at ating ito inisa, makakasiguro tayo na makakamta natin ang tunay na kapanalunan sa darating na eleksyon.
As it is, Surigao del Norte 2nd District Representative Robert Ace Barbas says the Nacionalista Party already has over 12 candidates in their senatorial shortlist. But for sure, they are fielding incumbent Senators Amy Marcos and Pia Cayetano and Representative Camille Villar.
Siyempre, ang gusto natin yung mga winnable, yung pareha ang vision sa partido. At siyempre, yung merong prinsipyo dito sa kanilang kandidatura na nakasuporta sa kanilang mga plataforma.
At the event, Marcos also talked about the importance of alliances.
If we are spending our time, our resources, and our energy with opposing one another for political means, then we have very little time, resources, and energy left for transforming our country into a better place.
For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Humane and as truthful and as bloodless as possible. That's just how President Bongbong Marcos described the way his administration has carried out its crackdown on illegal drugs.
Our crackdown on illegal drugs, smuggling, illegal gambling, private armed groups, human trafficking, and criminality has also strengthened significantly in the ways that are not only effective, but legal and lawful. Indeed, police operations are now conducted as humane, as truthful, and as bloodless as possible.
Marcos said this during the 123rd anniversary of the Philippine National Police at Camp Crame in Quezon City. The president cited several achievements that the police force accomplished during his term, such as increased police deployment, lower crime rate, and the improved cybersecurity capability, all of which he credited to PNP Chief General Romel Marbil.
Under General Marbil, the police have taken aggressive steps towards sustaining the gains of peace and order that we have collectively and painstakingly worked hard for. The PNP has intensified its patrol operations and increased police deployment, contributing to a notable drop in crime rates, particularly in what was formerly crime-prone areas.
So I guess this is clear now that the president wants to make it extra clear in terms of how his approach to the war on drugs runs contrast to the bloody war on drugs during former President Duterte's term.
The clearest sign yet, because 2 years ago, during campaign trail and even the early days of the Marcos presidency, he had said that he will carry on Duterte's drug war, right? And at that time, we were trying to figure out what that means. Does that mean, as bloody a crackdown as Duterte, the former president, had made? But, over time, it has turned into something else entirely. And you hear him right now saying that we want to be as humane as possible. I believe that's the first time I've heard him say that publicly.
In terms of the number of crimes, well, the PNP did report a lesser number that's decreased by more than 8% from July 2022 to May 2023. The figures there from 2,450 or 57 cases down to just 187,652. So,
right. So that's 8% down. That's something to, I mean, a lower crime rate is always good, right?
It's always welcome.
It's always welcome.
Crime solution efficiency, they say, also remained relatively stable at the 60% mark throughout the last 2 years.
Also, then this is more exciting for me because I always like having nice, shiny new things, not for myself, but
You're
for
getting
our
distracted
public
by new
defender.
toys? Okay.
Yes. So despite all the criticism that the administration has been receiving from Vice President Duterte, Sara Duterte, President Marcos has repeatedly praised General Marbil's leadership, especially for his effective police deployment strategy.
But anyways, as you were saying, that you were more interested in the equipment, right?
Right. Oh, yes.
Which they had handed over today.
How much did they spend?
Over $500 million pesos. That's a lot.
a lot of money.
553.3 million.
And that includes...
Is that correct? 553? It's over $500 million.
Oh, over $500 million. So the modern equipment supposedly includes 20 units, 4x4 personal carriers, almost 300 light motorcycles, 193 light transport vehicles, 75 patrol jeeps, and 155 light machine guns that are 5.56 millimeter caliber, in case you wanted to
those
know.
are the kinds of equipment that you get excited about.
Why not, right? I mean, we always
Weapons,
complain.
artillery, firearms.
Well, President Marcos even inspected and tried some of the weapons himself.
So
during-
see, I'm not the only
So-
one who's excited about the new stuff.
I'm sure they are, and it's you know, at a time when there's heightened security, both internal and external. I'm sure this is welcome news to the armed forces.
I just want to know what happened to the body cams and if they are using them in police
Good
operations.
question.
Right? We
There
have
was
been
a
getting-
time that was a mandate, right? That they were supposed to wear body cams in any operations from here on out. Good question. We should ask the general that. We had him on in the studio, remember, recently.
Yes.
We'll ask him that next time.
I don't know if he wants to come back, but we will try to make him come back.
Let's talk about the economy now. There is some good news. It's a rare day when I get to deliver good news. The economy saw faster growth in the second quarter, with GDP coming in at 6.3%, thanks to a construction boom. The second quarter print is quite a jump from the 5.8% growth logged in the first quarter, and also beat most analysts' forecasts. The government is targeting a growth rate of 6 to 7% this year, and this second quarter figure brings average growth for for the first half of the year to 6%. That means the economy would need to grow by another 6% in the second half to meet the lower end of that target. The main contributor to the second quarter expansion is the construction sector, which grew by 16%, with almost 1 million jobs generated in June. Consumer spending saw modest growth, while agriculture posted a decline, largely due to effects from El Nino. This time, though, government spending gave a big boost to make up for it, growing 10.7% on year, as opposed to last year when it contracted. Economists say that the agri-sector could bounce back next quarter, that is, if no new typhoons come our way.
Kung wala naman pong ganong grabing mga super typhoon na dadating sa atin, this should provide help for our agriculture sector. Kung makita nyo po kasi nag-negative po yung agriculture sector natin for second quarter. And despite that, we grew by 6.3%, no, coming of the government na marirealize daw natin na lower prices of food, especially by November of this year. And napakalaki pong Christmas gift po yun para sa ating Filipino household spending, and therefore that should provide more spending power for other items, and that should push our economic activities faster.
Meanwhile, the National Irrigation Administration has started selling 29 pesos a kilo rice at some Kadiwa centers in Central Luzon, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, and Caraga. This is part of NIA's contract farming program, where qualified farms receive subsidies and farm inputs, the goal of which is to allow them eventually to be able to sell rice cheaper. The program targets 4P beneficiaries, the elderly, solo parents, and those with special needs. Watch Group Pantay Bigas says it's not sustainable, but the NIA says, well, this is just the start.
Hindi siya sustainable kasi niya ang nag-implement. Dapat ang mag-implement yung national government para ma-ensure na lagyan talaga niya ng budget. Kasi ang role talaga ng NIA, ensure yung patubig ng malawak na bilang ng lahat ng mga natatamnan ng palay. Hindi siya dapat contract growing project, kundi gawin na nila sa buong lupain na natatamnan natin ng pagkain para ma-ensure.
In reality kasi hindi naman natin kaya i-subsidize lahat eh. Ang reason kung bakit tayo nagkaroon ng contract farming para maturuan, makapacitate natin yung mga farmers natin, may ipakita natin sa kanila yung tamang production, yung tamang sistema para at the end of the day maging sustainable ito. Gusto natin yung sustainability.
Now the question is, how will that higher GDP number factor into the Bangko Central's rate decision at the Monetary Board's next meeting on August 15? Bangko Central Governor Eli Remolona Jr. says that price increases on food, fuel, and power may have already peaked, which leads us to the next question. Is it enough to cut rates? Kathy Yang caught up with Remolona on thought leaders, and this is what he had to say.
At what point would you say it would be concerning enough for you to possibly make a move of a rate cut, of a key rate cut by August 15th?
So far, the output numbers have been looking good. So it hasn't been a consideration in terms of a rate cut. Inflation has been more of a consideration. Is inflation beginning to settle firmly within the 2 to 4% target range? So that's the main thing. Are we comfortable enough with where inflation is going before we do a rate cut?
Do you want to get ahead of it? You're at 4.4, but you got to get it down first to 2 to 4%, which is the inflation target range.
Somewhat near 3%, so that if there's some upside shocks, then we will still stay within the target range.
What would be those upside shocks?
Well, there's still oil. It could still hit us. I would say mainly oil, but there's other food items besides rice. They're usually a factor.
Catch that full interview on August 15 at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time, only here on One News.
Well, certainly, the Bangko Central has been busy of late. Today, it lifted the moratorium on issuing new digital bank licenses. That means beginning January 1, 2025, they will begin accepting applications for 4 new digital banking licenses. These could mean new players entirely, but it's also open for existing banks that want to convert their licenses to digital. That's an important concession because one of the benefits of converting is that digital banks are required to hold much less capital than universal banks, which means they can offer much smaller loan sizes, for instance. The moratorium had been in place for 3 years now, and its lifting was welcomed by industry players. At the moment, there are already 6 digital banking licensees in the Philippines: Maya, GoTime, Tonic, Overseas Filipino Bank, Uno Bank, and Union Digital. Of these, only Tonic and Uno Bank are not backed by either conglomerates or the government. Now, Governor Remolona said new applicants must offer unique products and services with significant potential to reach broader, underserved market segments. They must also display sufficient capabilities and readiness to deploy their digital solutions and to sustainably grow their business within the Philippines setting.
So you get excited by new equipment. I get excited by new banking services.
No, that moratorium has been in place for a long time.
3 years.
Right? And it's about time, I think. Post-COVID, it's a fresh start.
Ultimately, more competition translates is good for the consumer. That's who it benefits at the end of the day. It's harder for companies because then they have to innovate and move faster to try to capture a bigger share of the market. But ultimately, we all know that the Philippines is underserved when it comes to financial services. So the pie is huge, and so it's a welcome move to
Just begs
be
the
lifting the
question, though,
moratorium.
with our digital coverage not that great in terms of internet services, I hope that these digital banks are able to be accessed by those that need them most. But that would need a lot of investments.
But
from
I
both
think
the
we're
public
getting
and
there.
private sector.
We're getting there.
Right, so more good news maybe right after the break. We will be speaking to attorney Mark Dennis Hoven, the Philippines' representative to the Loss and Damage Fund Board, about addressing global disaster response and climate change. Don't go away. You're still watching The Big Story here on One News.
Another contaminant spill threatens the famous Sagay Marine Reserve in Negros Occidental. The Philippine Coast Guard has responded to a molasses spill at the Sagay feeder port. The leak happened yesterday as molasses was being loaded onto the MT Mary Queen of Charity. Containment operations have begun and water samples have been taken to determine the extent of the contamination. Molasses, which is liquid sugar, can sink to the bottom of the sea and suffocate marine life. Meanwhile, salvage operations continue on the MT Terra Nova to siphon the remaining oil from its tanks. As this continues, income losses from affected fisherfolk is also climbing, as fishing activities are still banned in areas affected by the oil spill. In Bataan alone, some 17,000 fishermen are affected. The Department of Agriculture estimates income loss as of yesterday at 78 million pesos.
And ito pong quick response fund po namin na ito na 46 million ay good po ito for the rest of the year. So definitely, hindi po ito sasapat lalo pa kung makikita natin na patuloy pa po magtatagal yung operasyon ng siphoning po and ng pag-salvage po dito sa mga lumubog po na barko o vessel dito sa aming lalawigan.
Certainly, it's no secret that the Philippines is among the most vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change. And so it was significant when President Marcos proudly announced last month that the country had been chosen to host the board of the Loss and Damage Fund. This is the historic fund created at COP28 in Dubai last year that will provide financial assistance to countries heavily impacted by climate change. Specifically, it aims to compensate developing nations for economic damage from a wide range of disasters, including devastating floods, drought, and sea level rise. And so far, wealthy nations have pledged $700 million to the fund. The Philippines' bid to host the fund won over 7 other contenders. Here to talk to us about this very important development is former Finance Undersecretary Mark Dennis Hoven. Attorney Hoven is a member of the Loss and Damage Fund Board and was the Philippine representative to the negotiations in South Korea last month. Welcome to The Big Story. Thanks for making time for us tonight, Attorney.
Yeah, good evening, ladies. Thank you for having me.
I don't know if I should call you attorney or Yusek, you being a former...
Just call me Mark.
Okay, Mark. Okay. So you were the Philippine representative to the negotiations last month in South Korea. Tell us what that was like. There were 7 other contenders. How did the group end up choosing the Philippines as the host?
Well, first off, the rules for selecting the host country has, in broad strokes, has been determined already during COP28. So it's really a matter for the board of the Loss and Damage Fund to put in the meat on this particular voting protocol. Now, basically, voting was done by the 26 board members of the Loss and Damage Fund, including yours truly. So there are 26 of us representing an equal number of developed and developing countries. So basically, we had to go through the the tender of all 8 candidates and see which was the best offer insofar as hosting is concerned. And we're very thankful that the Philippines was selected to be the host of the Loss and Damage Fund Board.
And so from there, what is the significance of it? I mean, in broad strokes, we understand that it's historic because number one, it's significant. It's historic the fact that all the countries in COP28 last year came together and agreed to pull together this loss and damage fund, and then secondly, that the Philippines was chosen for the inaugural hosting. But what's the significance of it? What does it entail us or enable us to do?
Okay, so first off, we must deal with the historical antecedents of this movement, this loss and damage movement. The movement to support or respond to loss and damage has been ongoing for the last 30 years. Basically, developing countries were seeking support from developed countries to aid them on matters or on effects which cannot be dealt with by mitigation and adaptation efforts. So for the most part, this has been a failure until COP27, which was the COP before the Dubai COP, which was held in Egypt. So at that point, everyone was surprised that suddenly there was a groundswell for the creation of a loss and damage fund. And it was the momentum was followed through in COP28 in Dubai, where the fund was operationalized. So because of this long-standing debate, I think it's a very noteworthy achievement. Another thing is, over time we see that climate emergencies are worsening. You see, you see sea level rise, intensifying tropical cyclones and hurricanes, sandstorms, and the like. And all of these are a result of climate change, as we know, right? So we know that over time, loss and damage, or the aspect of climate change which cannot be addressed by mitigation and adaptation, will continue to grow, and it's expected by year 2030, annual global loss and damage would reach around $30 billion US, and it will grow from that point on. So it's in that sense, it will be increasingly important to have to have an entity or to have a body to support the world insofar as loss and damage is concerned. And it's very so therefore it's very it's a good opportunity for the Philippines to showcase its leadership in this space.
Right. I always think, Mark, about how the Philippines has the front seat to all the bad effects of climate change, right? So a lot of people
Yes.
think it makes sense. Now, there's already been a pledge of $700 million. How will this be operationalized? How can this money grow? Pag naubos yan, paano natin popondohan ulit? Do we just keep asking the wealthier nations to keep assisting us as part of parang kind of like a climate justice, no? Simplistically saying, for at least for those or for viewers who are not familiar, we bear the brunt of
Developing nations bear the brunt of the climate change impacts. When
Right.
in fact we are one of the
Least contributors.
smallest contributors to carbon emissions. So
How do we operationalize?
Okay, so we know, of course, that the 600 or 700 million US currently held by the fund or currently pledged to the fund is, of course, insufficient to address loss and damage over the long run. So the donor countries, I think, exercise a lot of wisdom in the sense that the original pledge of $700 million is essentially to force or to fast track the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. That is, setting up the host country of the board, selecting the executive director, putting in the basic framework of the fund, including access modalities as well as financial mechanisms. So the idea is after the full setup, or after at the time when the board is ready to implement projects, developed countries will continue to pledge additional funds because, as I said earlier, the requirements are really, really staggering, and it's increasingly becoming more staggering over time. So I think that's clear to everyone. Now, as to how this is funded, so we see there's, as you know, there's this COP for climate change every year. It rotates amongst all countries. So basically, this year it will be held in Azerbaijan. Next year it will be held in Brazil, and moving forward it will be held in a different country. So during this COP, basically developed countries, uh, primarily pledge additional funds to support, to support not only the loss and damage fund, but also the three other funding arrangement of the UNFCCC. So these are the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Fund, as well as the Adaptation Fund.
Right. So are these
So,
pledges?
as- Yes, sorry.
Are these pledges voluntary, or is there some sort of computation na, this is how much, like say, greenhouse gases you emitted, and therefore this is how much you owe the fund, or how does that work?
Okay. So basically, this is, the short answer is it's, of course, voluntary. At the end of the day, the UNFCCC cannot force countries, whether developed or developing, to put in money to support, to help developing countries. But here's where, the international climate policy comes in. So in the 90s, basically there was this dichotomy formed where you have Annex 1 countries or developed countries and non-Annex 1 countries, which are developing countries. So there's already an arrangement where funds are channeled from developed countries towards developing countries to support all these efforts. So the bigger question is, what if it becomes so bad that the requirements would be humongous, and you have countries now, even developed countries, facing fiscal distress? So how will people deal with this? Now, if you ask me that question, I don't know the answer, to be quite frank with you.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, Mark. Now that we know where the funding is going to come from, how will the board choose who gets priority in terms of funding? There are a lot of course, vulnerable nations. So how will the board decide who comes first?
And to follow up on that, and as host, do we get a bigger slice of the pie? Does it translate to that?
Okay, so let me first answer Regina's question. So when you have a party, typically the host doesn't go first on the buffet table, right?
Okay,
So-
fair enough. I get it.
Short. That's the short answer there. Now, long answer: prioritization. So it's the governing instrument specifies that particularly vulnerable developing countries are to get funding from the loss and damage fund. So basically, it eliminates countries which are not particularly vulnerable and not developing. So you're left probably with around 60% of the world. Now from there, you deal with the issue of particular vulnerability. So when you talk about particular vulnerability, there are very specific regions in the world which are particularly vulnerable. So among these countries, we have the Philippines. If in some surveys, in fact, the Philippines is the top-notcher insofar as global disaster risk is concerned. But then we shouldn't waive that, we shouldn't waive that card. At the end of the day, the board will need to make an independent decision on specific projects forwarded by specific countries. And this should be decided in an objective manner. So,
That's also fair. But what's the timeline of all of
Yeah,
this, Mark?
I was just gonna
Okay.
ask. I mean, you talked
Okay.
about operationalizing, but how soon do you think nations can begin applying for funding from the loss and damage
Okay.
fund?
the timeline, the indicative timeline is by January 2025. You'll have a moving fund. And actually, at the start, at the probably at the end of 2020, 2023, when there was a decision to operationalize, people from all over the world thought that this was a tall feat, almost impossible to carry out, because you have to deal with several critical matters or critical issues, and all of these issues are contentious. Like on the issue of host country, so it was foreseen at that point last year that a lot of countries would vie for hosting, and all of these countries would exercise some sort of political wrestling or political pressure in order to get hosting. But lo and behold, during the second board meeting of the Loss and Damage Fund, the board came together and decided that the host country is the Philippines. So I'm quite optimistic on what this board can do, because in a short span of 2 board meetings, we've managed to deal with a lot of critical issues. So for the year, we'll have 2 additional board meetings where we'll have to deal with issues such as selection of the executive director, as well as signing the financial intermediary agreement with the World Bank. So I'm quite confident that by the end of the year, all these critical building blocks would be in place, and therefore by early next year, the fund will be ready to accept business already.
Okay, I know that we're out of time, pero may office ba to? Like ADB, who is headquartered in Manila? Are you gonna have a nice building built, or are you gonna rent? What's the plan there?
Okay, so first we must discuss the character of the fund. So reading the COP decision and the governing instrument, this fund is comprised of 2 entities. It's the board, which will be housed in the Philippines, and the fund itself, which is hosted in the next 4 years by the World Bank. So basically, the fund will utilize the international legal personality, as well as the diplomatic immunities provided by the entire world to the World Bank. Now, as to the hosting, syempre, the Philippines is now the permanent host of the board, and therefore there's some benefit to having a permanent seat or permanent place of business for this particular board. And right now, that is being discussed in the Philippine legislature. So currently, as you know, there's a bill pending both in the House of Representatives and the Senate, granting legal personality to the Loss and Damage Fund. So that is a critical issue which is currently being addressed in this particular bill, and we hope, of course, that for purposes of longevity or for purposes of permanence, a physical space would be provided to the board.
Right. Well, we are right in the middle of typhoon season, so we are one with you in being hopeful that this fund can get started and operationalized as soon as possible. We're gonna have to leave that there for tonight, though. Thank you so much for talking us through this important work. That was Mark Dennis Hoven, former Finance Undersecretary and now board member of the Loss and Damage Fund.
So that's it for the big story tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.